Clara sat by the window, staring at the quiet lake that stretched beyond her small backyard. The late afternoon sun cast golden streaks across the water, and the gentle rustling of autumn leaves whispered a lonely melody. It was her favorite time of year, the time when the world seemed to slow down just enough for her to catch her own thoughts. But lately, even the serene beauty of the lake couldn't wash away the feeling that something or someone was missing from her life. Her home, cozy and carefully decorated, reflected her personality perfectly. Warm tones, books stacked in neat towers, photographs of friends and family scattered across the shelves. Yet, despite the comfort, there was a quiet emptiness she couldn't ignore. It wasn't that Clara had no friends or purpose, she had both, but there was a lingering sense of isolation, subtle longing for something she didn't have a name for. Perhaps it was connection, perhaps it was excitement, or perhaps it was simply someone to share her quiet world with as she sipped her tea. The phone rang, breaking the peaceful silence. Clara wasn't expecting anyone, and the sudden sound made her heart skip a beat. She wiped her hands on her sweater and answered, her voice soft but polite. "Hello." "Clara, it's Laura," the voice on the other end said, slightly hesitant. Clara immediately recognized the warmth, the familiar cadence of her longtime friend. They had known each other since college, through years of shared laughter, challenges, and life milestones. "Hi, Laura. How are you?" Clara asked, smiling. Even though the pang of loneliness lingered in her chest, there was a pause on the other end, almost as if Laura was gathering courage to say something. Then she spoke, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "Clara, I have a favor to ask. Something kind of unusual." Clara leaned back in her chair, curiosity piqued. "Anything, Laura. What is it?" "Well, Ethan," Laura hesitated. "He's going to be home alone this weekend while I'm away for work, and I was wondering if he could stay at your place. Just for the weekend. I don't really know anyone else he'd be comfortable with." Clara's eyes widened slightly. Ethan, Laura's son. She hadn't seen him in years. Not since he was a shy, awkward little boy with a mop of brown hair and a love for drawing. Now he was a teenager, on the brink of adulthood. And the idea of him staying in her home both surprised and intrigued her. Sure," Clara said, after a moment of thought. "He's welcome." "Of course." There was a short, relieved sigh on the other end of the line. "Thank you, Clara. I know it's sudden, and I really appreciate it." After hanging up, Clara found herself staring at the lake again, her mind restless. She couldn't help but feel a flutter of anticipation. Why did the thought of this visit make her chest tighten in a way she hadn't felt in years? It wasn't fear or anxiety, more like a quiet, electric curiosity. She didn't know why, but she sensed that this weekend might bring something unexpected into her life. Something she hadn't realized she was waiting for. That evening, Clara prepared the guest room with care. She smoothed the blankets, fluffed the pillows, and placed a small vase of fresh flowers on the nightstand. She wanted Ethan to feel welcome, to feel at ease. But deep down, she also wondered what it would be like to see him again, how much he had grown, what kind of person he had become, and whether she could reconnect with him in ways beyond mere familiarity. By the time the sun dipped behind the horizon, Clara's house was quiet, bathed in the soft glow of lamps and the fading orange light of twilight. She poured herself another cup of tea and curled up in her favorite chair with a book, though her mind wandered far from the pages. She thought about Laura, about Ethan, and about the unpredictable ways life sometimes brought people together. She remembered moments from the past, childhood stories Laura had shared about Ethan, little adventures he had gone on, the way he laughed when he was genuinely happy. Clara smiled softly, realizing that life often unfolded in quiet, surprising ways. The ordinary moments could turn extraordinary if one was open to them as night fell and the lake outside reflected the shimmer of stars. Clara felt a mixture of excitement and calm. The weekend ahead promised something different, something she could not yet name. Perhaps it would be a simple visit, perhaps a chance for Ethan to have a safe and enjoyable weekend. Or perhaps it would be more somewhere deep inside. Clara understood that life had a way of teaching lessons in the most unexpected ways. She didn't yet know what she would learn from Ethan's visit. But she felt the pull of possibility, the gentle tug of curiosity and hope. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to imagine that the quiet house she called home might soon be filled with laughter, stories, and the warmth of connection she had been quietly longing for. And with that thought, Clara drifted into a restless sleep, unaware that the weekend ahead would challenge her heart, spark her imagination, and teach her something profound about life, family, and the surprising ways people enter our lives just when we need them most. The following morning, Clara awoke to the soft light of dawn spilling across her living room. The house was quiet, the only sound, the gentle hum of the heater and the occasional chirp of a bird outside. She poured herself a cup of coffee and allowed herself a small smile, thinking about the day ahead. Ethan would arrive in a few hours, and despite her calm demeanor, her heart carried a flutter she couldn't quite explain. When the doorbell rang, Clara felt a twinge of excitement. She opened the door to find Ethan standing there, taller than she remembered, his backpack slung casually over one shoulder. His hair had grown slightly longer, and there was a quiet confidence in the way he carried himself yet. His eyes still held that hint of curiosity and vulnerability she had always noticed as a child. "Hi, Mrs. Jacobs," he said politely. Clara smiled warmly. "Call me Clara," she said, gesturing for him to come inside. "I'm glad you're here, Ethan." As they settled in, Clara couldn't help but notice the familiar patterns in his mannerisms, the way he fiddled with the zipper of his backpack, the thoughtful pauses before speaking, the subtle tilt of his head when he listened. She felt a wave of nostalgia, remembering the boy he had been years ago. It was strange, the way memory could bridge years. Clara remembered when Ethan was a small child, always full of questions and wonder. She recalled the afternoons she had spent helping him with school projects, the long walks to the park when Laura had been too busy, and the quiet evenings they had shared reading books or telling stories. Those moments had been simple, yet profound, filled with a kind of connection that lingered even in their absence. As Ethan unpacked his bag, he pulled out a sketchbook and a few pencils. Clara's eyes lit up. She remembered how much he loved to draw, how his imagination had always been vivid and full of emotion. "You still draw?" she said softly, a smile tugging at her lips. "Yeah," Ethan replied, opening the sketchbook to reveal pages filled with landscapes, sketches of trees, and even a few small, detailed portraits. I've kept at it." Clara leaned closer, admiring the work. "You've really grown in talent," she said. "It's beautiful." There was a pause, a shared quiet that carried more weight than words could hold. For a moment, the years seemed to melt away, and Clara was back in the afternoons of laughter and storytelling, back in the soft warmth of connection that had always existed between them as they moved through the morning. Clara found herself remembering why they had drifted apart. Life had a way of pulling people in different directions. Laura had been busy with work. Ethan had been caught up in school and childhood obligations. And Clara herself had retreated into the solitude of her home, wrapped up in her routines and quiet dreams. There had never been a falling out, no grand conflict, just the slow, inevitable drift of separate lives, and yet, despite the years, there had always been a thread of quiet understanding, a bond that neither distance nor time could sever. Clara realized that this weekend was not just about Ethan staying in her home. It was about reconnecting, about rediscovering a piece of life and emotion she had nearly forgotten. After breakfast, they found themselves in the living room, the sketchbook spread out on the coffee table. Clara pointed to a drawing of the lake at sunset. "This one is amazing," she said. "It's like you captured the light just perfectly." Ethan smiled, a faint blush creeping across his cheeks. "Thanks. I always remember sitting here looking at the lake through your window. I liked how calm it felt. I wanted to try and capture it." Clara felt her chest tighten, a mixture of pride and something deeper, almost like longing not for him in a romantic way, but for the connection, for the shared understanding of moments that mattered. "You've always had a way of noticing the little things," she said quietly. "I'm glad you never lost that." They fell into an easy rhythm, sharing stories and laughing softly at memories that bridged the years. Ethan talked about school, friends, and the small challenges he had faced, while Clara shared stories of her own about her work, travels she had taken, and the little joys and disappointments that life had offered. It was in these quiet, unhurried moments that Clara realized the depth of their bond. It wasn't flashy or dramatic. It was subtle, woven from years of familiarity, trust, and shared understanding. And yet, it carried a kind of intimacy that was re-ran emotional closeness that didn't require words to explain by mid-afternoon. Clara felt a gentle warmth in her heart. She remembered all the reasons she ate. Mid-morning, the house was filled with the soft hum of daily life. Clara moved about the kitchen, preparing a simple breakfast while Ethan lingered near the window, gazing at the lake outside. The sunlight reflected off the water in a dance of gold and silver, and Clara couldn't help but notice how the light seemed to highlight Ethan's features, the same features she remembered, though now taller, more confident, and undeniably thoughtful. "Do you want some pancakes?" she asked, flipping a golden one onto a plate. "Sure," Ethan said, turning toward her with a quiet smile. But his attention quickly shifted back to the window. Clara followed his gaze and saw a small group of ducks gliding across the lake, their movements calm and synchronized. There was something in his silence, a kind of peaceful reverence, that reminded Clara of the boy he had once been, curious, observant, and quietly sensitive to the world around him as they ate. Ethan mentioned that he had rediscovered an old journal while cleaning his room before leaving home. "I found a bunch of old drawings and notes from when I was 12. He said, his voice tinged with both embarrassment and amusement. "I was dramatic, I guess." Clara laughed softly. "Dramatic or not, it's a part of who you are. I'd love to see them." After breakfast, they settled in the living room with the journal. Flipping through the pages, Clara was struck by the depth of emotion in Ethan's younger self. There were sketches of the lake, the trees, even the small garden outside her window, captured with surprising skill and attention to detail. There were also short passages of text, little musings about friendship, longing, and the desire to be understood. Reading them, Clara felt a curious mix of nostalgia and tenderness. She remembered Ethan's shy smile, the way he had once confided in her about small worries, and how he had trusted her with his feelings in a way few adults had ever received. And now, seeing those thoughts again, she realized how much of that young boy's heart had carried through the years. "You haven't changed much," G said gently, closing the journal. "You still notice the little things, the details that most people miss." Ethan shrugged, a small, self-conscious smile tugging at his lips. "Maybe I guess I like remembering things the way they felt, not just the way they looked." For a moment, there was silence between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of quiet that spoke volumes, the kind that reminded Clara why she had always cherished these rare, unspoken connections. She realized that the bond they shared wasn't about time or distance, it was about presence, attention, and the ability to truly see someone, even in small moments. Later that morning, fate intervened in the form of a simple coincidence. As Clara carried a tray of tea to the living room, she stumbled slightly on a small rug, and Ethan quickly reached out to steady her. "You okay?" he asked, his voice calm but filled with concern. Clara smiled, touched by the gesture. "I'm fine, thank you." But the brief contact, the warmth of his hand, and the gentle steadiness sent a ripple through her chest she hadn't anticipated. It was not romantic in the traditional sense, yet it was undeniably intense. It was a reminder of the human need for care, attention, and closeness. And it stirred feelings she had long kept dormant. They sat together afterward, drinking their tea, but something had shifted. The air between them felt lighter, yet charged with quiet awareness. Clara realized that even small, ordinary events, a hand extended, a shared laugh, a moment of mutual understanding, could reignite the heart in ways one never expected. Later, Ethan suggested they take a walk along the lake, a route they had often taken when he was younger. Clara agreed, and as they stepped outside, the crisp autumn air enveloped them, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and the distant tank of the water. They walked side by side, not speaking at first, simply letting the rhythm of their steps and the serenity of the surroundings carry them. And then Ethan stopped, pointing toward a tree where the morning sunlight filtered through amber leaves. "I used to sit there," he said softly. "I'd watch the lake and try to figure out life, I guess. It felt safe, like a place where I could just be me." Clara looked at him, her heart swelling with a mix of admiration and something deeper in emotional intensity that was purely about connection. "It still is," she said. "Sometimes the places that matter don't change. And sometimes neither do the people who remember them with us." Ethan's gaze met hers, and for a brief, fleeting moment, Clara felt the years fall away. They were not child and adult, or distant acquaintances. They were two people who had shared laughter, trust, and quiet moments of understanding. And in that understanding there was a warmth, a depth, and an unspoken resonance that neither of them could fully explain. As they continued walking, Clara realized something she hadn't expected. Life had a way of bringing people together again, at just the right moment, through the smallest twists of fate. A spilled tea, a stumbled step, a shared glance. Sometimes these simple events were enough to awaken the heart, to remind one of what truly mattered. By the time they returned to the house, Clara felt a profound sense of gratitude. She didn't know what the weekend would bring, but she knew that the connection she shared with Ethan rooted in years of shared memories. Trust and quiet understanding was rare and precious, and as the afternoon light spilled through the windows, she allowed herself to hope, to anticipate, and to fully embrace the beauty of this present twist in their lives. The weekend, she realized, had only just begun, and already it was teaching her that the heart often remembers what the mind forgets, and that even the smallest moments could hold the most profound meaning. As the afternoon sun began to dip toward the horizon, Clara found herself sitting on the porch, a soft breeze ruffling her hair. The lake shimmered in the distance, its surface reflecting the golden light in gentle ripples. She held a cup of tea between her hands, though she hardly noticed the warmth of the mug. Her thoughts were elsewhere, on the quiet presence of Ethan, who was now sitting a few feet away on the wooden railing, sketchbook open, pencil moving with careful deliberation. There was a pause in his work, a stillness that mirrored her own. Both of them seemed caught in the same delicate tension, as though the world had narrowed to this small space on the porch. Clara had always been perceptive, and she could feel it, the unspoken emotions that hovered between them, delicate yet powerful, like the faint scent of autumn in the air. Ethan glanced up from his sketchbook and met her eyes. There was a vulnerability there, a quiet question that hung in the space between them. He didn't speak, yet Clara understood. He was searching for words, perhaps the right ones to describe feelings that had been building for years, feelings that neither of them had fully confronted. "Clara," he said finally, his voice soft, "I've always appreciated how you listen. Really listen. Even when I didn't know how to say what I was feeling." Clara's chest tightened at his words. She remembered all the times he had confided in her as a child, all the small secrets and worries he had shared, and she realized, with a mix of tenderness and sadness, that some emotions never faded. They only waited for the right moment to surface. "I've always listened," she replied quietly, her eyes fixed on the lake. "I guess I've always hoped you'd feel safe enough to share what was on your mind, even the things that were hard to say." There was a long pause. Ethan turned back to his sketchbook, but Clara could see the slight tremble in his hands, the hesitation in his posture. Neither of them spoke for several moments, and in that silence there was an intensity neither wanted to break. It was the kind of quiet that carried more weight than words filled with longing reflection. An unspoken truth that demanded careful handling. Clara thought about the years they had missed, the days when life had pulled them in different directions. She remembered her own hesitations, the times she had wondered if she should reach out, and the quiet moments of regret when she realized she hadn't. And now, here he was, Sithan, the young man she had watched grow up from a distance, sitting beside her, reminding her that emotions never truly disappeared. They simply waited for recognition. Ethan finally spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. Sometimes I feel like I've carried this feeling of being understood by you even when I wasn't sure anyone else could. And I think that's why I've always remembered those afternoons we spent together." Clara felt her eyes well up, the raw honesty of his words piercing through the quiet hesitation she had felt all day. She wanted to reach out to speak the truths she had kept buried, that she had always cared, that she had always admired him not as a child, but as a person who had grown into something remarkable. Yet, she held back, respecting the delicate line between care and overstepping, aware that some emotions needed space to breathe before they could fully be understood. "I feel the same, Ethan," she said finally, her voice steady yet warm. "I've always remembered those moments. They meant a lot to me too, more than I ever said out loud." For a brief moment, time seemed suspended. The wind rustled the leaves around them, and the distant water glimmered like scattered jewels in the evening light. There was longing, yes, but also clarity. Both of them understood that their connection had been built over years of shared experiences, quiet conversations, and trust that ran deeper than anything spoken. Ethan looked down at his sketchbook again, and Monday morning arrived with a soft, golden light spilling across the lake. Clara awoke earlier than usual, the calm stillness of the house filling her with a quiet contentment she hadn't felt in years. The weekend had unfolded in ways she never could have anticipated, filled with laughter, gentle conversations, and moments of connection that touched her heart deeply. Ethan was already awake, seated at the kitchen table with his sketchbook open. He glanced up when Clara entered, and for a moment, the room was silent, but full of the warmth of shared experience and understanding. The tension that had once lingered between them had been replaced with something far more comforting: acceptance, trust, and a quiet, unspoken bond that needed no labels to be meaningful. "Good morning," Clara said softly, placing a cup of coffee on the table beside him. "Morning," Ethan replied, his voice calm yet carrying a subtle edge of emotion. He hesitated, then closed his sketchbook. "Clara, I want to thank you for everything this weekend, for letting me stay, for listening, for understanding." Clara felt a lump in her throat, touched by the sincerity in his words. "It's been my pleasure, Ethan. Really, you've reminded me of so many things I'd almost forgotten about life, and about connection, and about the joy of simply being present with someone." He nodded, looking down at his hands for a moment before lifting his gaze to meet hers. "I think I understand now why those afternoons we spent together when I was younger, why they meant so much. I didn't realize it at the time, but I felt safe, and I felt seen. You helped me feel like I mattered." Clara felt a warmth spread through her chest. It wasn't romantic in the conventional sense, it was something purer, something lasting, the recognition that two people could touch each other's lives in ways that shaped who they were. That gave them courage and hope. "You've grown into a remarkable person, Ethan," she said softly. "I'm proud of you, and I'm grateful I got to see that this weekend. It's a gift to witness someone become who they're meant to be." Ethan smiled, a small but genuine smile, and for a moment neither spoke. They simply sat together, letting the quiet fill the space, their hearts full in ways words could never fully express. As the morning continued, they decided to take one last walk by the lake. The crisp air carried the scent of fallen leaves, and the sun reflected off the water in gentle flashes. Clara and Ethan moved side by side, comfortable in their silence, yet aware of the emotional depth that had developed between them. At a small clearing, Ethan paused, looking out across the water. "Clara, I think this weekend has taught me something important," he said quietly. "Life isn't just about the big moments, it's about noticing the small ones. It's about the people who care enough to stay even when it's quiet, even when nothing dramatic happens." Clara nodded, touched by his insight. "Exactly," she said. "It's the quiet moments, the shared understanding, the trust we build, that's what shapes our hearts the most. Sometimes, those are the moments that matter the most." They lingered there, letting the lake's gentle waves provide a backdrop to their reflections. Clara felt a sense of closure and fulfillment she hadn't known she needed. She realized that the weekend wasn't about change in the dramatic sense, it was about connection, about understanding, and about recognizing the beauty of life's subtle, emotional lessons. When Laura arrived later that afternoon to pick up Ethan, Clara felt a bittersweet tug in her heart. She hugged him gently, careful to convey warmth and appreciation. "Take care, Ethan," she said softly. "And remember, you've got people who believe in you. People who care." Ethan hugged her back briefly, a quiet smile on his face. "I'll remember, Clara. Thank you for everything." As they drove away, Clara returned to her quiet home. The lake shimmered in the fading light, and the trees whispered softly in the wind. She sat by the window, reflecting on the weekend, on the laughter, the shared stories, the unspoken truths, and the moments of understanding that had connected their hearts. It was a weekend that had reminded her something fundamental, that life's most profound lessons often came quietly, without fanfare or drama, that the bonds we nurture, the patience we show, and the care we extend to others could leave lasting impressions far deeper than we often realize. Clara smiled softly, feeling a sense of hope and promise. The weekend had ended, but the connection she shared with Ethan would remain. A quiet thread of trust and understanding woven into the fabric of their lives. She knew that life would continue with its usual ebb and flow, but she felt ready to embrace it with a heart more open, more aware, and more attuned to the subtle joys that made life meaningful. As evening fell, the lake bathed in the gentle glow of twilight. Clara leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes. She felt gratitude, fulfillment, and a quiet peace. The weekend had been a gift, a reminder that human connection, understanding, and heartfelt presence were the most valuable treasures of all. And in that still, reflective moment, Clara realized that sometimes life's simplest encounters, like a visit from a friend's child, could bring the deepest, most lasting emotional truths. The lessons lingered, the warmth remained, and hope for the future glimmered like the last rays of sunlight on the water. For Clara, the weekend was more than just a visit. It was a revelation, a quiet celebration of connection, and a reminder that the heart had an infinite capacity for understanding, compassion, and emotional depth. And as the stars began to twinkle over the lake, she knew one thing for certain: life's most profound moments often arrived when least expected, leaving a legacy of love, hope, and heartfelt clarity that would endure forever.